Production. Good morning, folks. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll get started. My name is Mark Lotterer, and wanted to say thank you for joining our call today. As most of you know, this is the third session that we've conducted to review the changes to the Tersa rate manual. As a reminder that the changes go into effect on October 1st. The first two sessions were conducted by Penny Epler-Caro. You can see that she is our state underwriting counsel. This third session will be led mostly by John Keneally. John is our Syracuse district manager and underwriting counsel. As Penny just mentioned, the calls are being recorded, and our sales team will be sending out information on how to access the information presented today and the prior sessions as well. We would ask that you hold your questions to the end. There definitely will be time afforded to that, but wanted to hold those off to the end. So, John, I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Today's program is a focus on the residential transactions, although we will sprinkle in some commercial discussion as well. But for the most part, we're talking about the residential transactions and the replacing affirmative coverage. So to start off, what happened to affirmative coverage? And in the rate manual, Rules Section 2, except by endorsements set forth in Part 4 of the rate manual, no affirmative coverage may be added or provided in the policy, whether on Schedule B by endorsement or otherwise. So let's take care of, first of all, the couple exceptions that are mentioned. The first, the general endorsement may be used to provide affirmative coverage for party walls. And the second, the general endorsement may also be used to provide affirmative coverage regarding the exercise of specific rights of first refusal or options. And you can see the language that would be used. This language is the language that can be used. We're no longer able to craft our own affirmative coverage language, which is a real bonus here, because now we're using language that's standard across the state, across the country. And this is language that has been decided on in courts. We know as a company exactly what coverage we're offering. The claims people can know exactly what coverage is offered. There's no need to fight over what the language means and says, because it's already been decided. So I want to point out just quickly, to go back one, on a party wall, the company insures against loss or damage sustained by the insured by reason of the removal of the party wall, as shown on a survey, identifies as exception number, whatever exception number is the party wall exception that you're putting in on Schedule B. And for the rights of first refusal, for the loan policies, it's basically making the mortgage either unenforceable or has a lack of priority. And for an owner's policy, it's insuring against loss or damage by the fact that there is this right of first refusal. So now, there is a modification to the residential mortgage endorsement. So a lot of these endorsements have been cleaned up, so to speak. The language, again, being pulled out, redone to make it much more uniform and standard. You will see the language at the top. The company insures against loss or damage sustained by the insured by reason of, which is how most of our endorsements now will begin. The old residential mortgage endorsement would insure against, well, it would ensure that an easement, let's say, was fixed and ascertainable, the location thereof. We don't say that anymore. In fact, that was insurance on something that may not have even been a title issue. But when we look at the new residential mortgage endorsement language, it's insuring against enforced removal of any improvement located on the land as a result of an encroachment by the improvement onto a portion of the land subject to an easement. Um, and also in the event that the owners of the easement shall uh, compel removal or relocation of the encroaching improvement. Um, Also, a violation of restrictive covenants that, again, subordinates the lien of the insured mortgage or causes the invalidity or unenforceability of the mortgage. And then further, a violation on the land at the date of the policy of an enforceable covenant. So basically, the language of this endorsement really will cover most of the issues that lenders want coverage over. This is language that we would always put in to mortgage policies. And so now, instead of being able to put it on Schedule B, we will just make sure that the residential mortgage endorsement is added to the policy, but also that our lender customers know that the coverage is under the residential mortgage endorsement. So I think in the past, residential mortgage endorsement was always just a check the box and issue the endorsement type of a thing, and no one really read it. And not saying on our side, but for the customers, they knew they needed it. They didn't know what it covered. So I think it's up to us to make sure that our customers will be knowing what coverage they're getting under the residential mortgage endorsement, because it will take out the need for the affirmative coverage on, let's say, easements, restrictive covenants, et cetera, that we would normally have to add in Schedule B. So that's the first of our endorsements that is basically going to replace our affirmative coverage requests. Um, the Alta 9 was the comprehensive endorsement. It contained a multitude of coverage over easements, restrictive covenants, and oil and gas leases. It typically required a survey to be able to issue it, and it cost 10% of the loan premium. It was only available for lenders on loan policies. Now, this has been replaced by a series of endorsements from the new Alta 9 series, the Alta 28 series, and the Alta 35 series. Lenders and owners now have a cafeteria style of choices for coverages depending on the circumstances. And the biggest thing too is that this coverage is now afforded to owners. A lot of the affirmative coverage that we had in the past was for mortgage policies only, and a lot of the endorsements, including the Alta 9, was only available on a loan policy. So the nice part is for consumers, they can now purchase the coverage that was only afforded to a lender in the past. So the Alta 9 series really takes the focus on restrictive covenants. And so we start with the Alta 9.1-06 endorsement. This is an owner's policy only. It's intended for use with unimproved residential or commercial property, but can be issued in connection with improved property as well. It provides certain coverages to the buyer relating to violations of written covenants, conditions, limitations, or restrictions that occurred prior to the date of policy and are not accepted in Schedule B, whether or not the covenants are recorded in the public records. It also provides coverage relating to recorded notices of environmental protection covenant violations that are not accepted in Schedule B, but only to the extent of the violation that may be referred to in a recorded notice. So as we work our way through the various endorsements, basically, if we're talking about restrictive covenants, we're going to be looking at the 9 series. And then each of the endorsements breaks down the coverages in a little bit different way. So as you can see, this first one, we're talking about violations of covenants that have already happened. that occurred prior to the date of policy. Again, as we move forward, we will see that some of these endorsements will cover certain things that may be happening today. The Alta 2-06, the Alta 9.2-06 endorsement, again, it's an owner's policy endorsement. It's intended for use with improved property. It's the same coverage as the 9106, except it contains additional coverage pertaining to enforced removal of certain improvements due to violations of building setbacks. And so, again, as we take a look at, we started with the 9.1, which covered past violations of restrictive covenants. The 9.206 adds to that the violations due to building setbacks. We can only offer one Alta 9 series on an owner's policy and on a loan policy. So we want to make sure that we're catching all of the issues that need to be covered with the appropriate endorsement. Now switching over, we're taking these in order. So the 9306 is only available for loan policies, and it's very similar coverage to the coverage that was offered in the 9206 that we just saw, except it broadens the covered category of improvements. So it provides coverage relating to violations that result in, again, your lack of priority, your unenforceability of the mortgage due to the covenant violations. The 96.06 endorsement, again, a lender's policy. This can be issued in connection with unimproved property as well as improved property. And this endorsement provides certain coverages against loss or damage resulting from options to purchase, rights of first refusal, or rights of prior approvals. So again, looking at what issues are in our title, we picked the appropriate 9.606 endorsement. Now note that this coverage is very similar to what is covered in your residential mortgage endorsement. So you wouldn't necessarily need this coverage as well if you're dealing with a 1 to 4 family property. Again, because this can be used for residential or commercial property, not all of your policies under this would be fitting for a residential transaction in a 1 to 4 family situation. The Alta 9.6.1-06 endorsement, only available for loan policies again, but this one can also be issued in connection with unimproved property. Again, this also covers loss or damage by the options to purchase, etc., as in the previous. But then also it provides certain coverages resulting from private charges or assessments that appear in your restrictive covenants, but only those that are due and payable at the date of policy. So it will not cover obviously anything in the future as far as charges or charges or assessments, but it does cover past charges and assessments. So you can see there's a little extra coverage in case there are those covenants that require a payment of assessments or damages or charges, excuse me. The 9906, now this one again brings in that same coverage as we've talked about on the loan policies. This is what we would add to an owner's policy if we have some options to purchase, rights of first refusal, or rights of prior approval. It would insure against loss or damage because of those issues. So this is the first time we see this coverage available for owners. And so again, depending on what's in your chain of title, you're going to be able to pick out which endorsement is going to be most useful. The 9.706 endorsement, only available for loan policies. This is really your construction loan issues. So the coverages are similar to the ones we've talked about, but they're modified to provide coverage for future improvements based on plans. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to see the survey as well as the building plans so that we can overlay the two and know what coverages we're giving. And again, in the Alta 9 series, we're talking about restrictive covenants, building setbacks, things like that. So that would be the coverages that we're looking for against to cover the future improvements that are not on the ground yet. So, and the Alta 9.806 is the similar coverage to the other coverage that we've seen for the lender. Again, this is covering future improvements. So we would then necessarily need the survey and the plans to overlay to make sure that we're not violating any setbacks, et cetera. Okay. So again, the Alta 9 series was basically covering issues that pop up because of restrictive covenants. Now, the bigger portion of the Alta 9 coverage in the past, so it seemed, was coverage against encroachments. And so now we have the Alta 28 series, and we'll start with the 28-6 endorsement. This is available for both the owners and the loan policies. It's the same number for both. It's intended for use on improved commercial or residential property only. And it provides coverage for damage to or for enforced removal or alterations of existing buildings, which is caused by the exercise, use, or maintenance rights associated with specified easements. It's important to note that the issuance of this endorsement may require additional research and review of a survey prior to agreeing to issue this endorsement. When we're talking about this type of the Alta 28 series, these issues only come up if we see encroachments. And the only way we're really going to know about encroachments is if those appear on a survey. So when we're talking about whether you need a survey to issue the Alta 28 series, if you turn it around and say we wouldn't know about these issues but for a survey, it kind of makes it more clear why we have to look at a survey and make sure that we know where these easements, encroachments, et cetera, are going to be. The Alta 28.1 endorsement, again, for both the owners and the loan policy. This is also used for improved commercial or residential properties only. This one will cover loss or damage arising from the existing buildings on an insured parcel encroaching onto adjoining parcels or onto that portion of an easement. So this one specifically takes care of your encroachments of existing buildings onto your neighbor's property. It also covers your neighboring properties encroachments onto our insured lands. It will cover loss or damage by reason of the enforced removal of the existing buildings. And the coverage may be limited to a specific encroachment. So the other part of this is that we can tailor these endorsements to cover very specific certain kinds of encroachments. So if we have your house encroaching by 5 inches onto your neighbor's property, and we may decide that it's a safe risk to issue the Alta 28 endorsement in that regards. If we also have perhaps a swimming pool completely covering a gas easement, well, maybe we don't necessarily want to cover that. And so we're able to separate out in the endorsement itself which encroachment we are issuing the endorsement for and which encroachment we are not. So these can be tailored to the situation that you have in your chain of title. The Alta 28.206 endorsement, this will cover transaction-specific improvements. So if we're working with an encroachment of a fence or shrubbery or something, a parking lot, something, pavement in a parking lot. If we're covering those types of improvements, we can have a broader or narrower coverage on that regard for this coverage under this endorsement. So now we're not looking at what type of encroachment we have, but now we're talking about limiting or broadening your encroachments to something that's very specific on the land. So that's your 28.206 endorsement. So as we start to note, we will see that these endorsements really break down, again, the idea of a cafeteria approach to these issuances of the various endorsements. And as we work through these, we're going to learn over time which endorsements cover which specific items that we're finding. The Alta 28.3-06 endorsement, this again would be more for a construction loan. This coverage is also for future improvements. Again, we need to see the plans, because if we're insuring against encroachments into easements, we definitely need to know what plans, what the building plans are, and overlaying them on a survey that would show all of your endorsements. So we do need to see that the surveys are going to show the easements and things like that in order to be able to issue the 28.3-06 endorsement. So we need a specific survey that will show those. Those are typically your Alta NSPS surveys. So one more thing on the Alta 28.306 endorsement. This one's more expensive than most. The coverage on the other Alta 28 series is basically $50 for a residential transaction and $250 for a commercial transaction. The Alta 28 series figures out it's a percentage of the policy or $500, whichever is greater. And so, as you can see, when we're dealing with future improvements based on plans, we have much more risk to be concerned about, because we can't take a look and see that the buildings are encroaching. We're dealing with what's to be built. So obviously a little bit higher risk when you can't see what's already there. The Alta 35 series brings in the coverage formerly under the comprehensive Alta 9 for your oil and gas leases. And in upstate New York, that's what mostly we deal with. But really, this is talking about the extraction or development of minerals or any other subsurface substances. And so when we have an oil and gas lease, gravel pit rights, mining rights from 100 years ago, that's what we're talking about here. So the Alta 3506 endorsement is the one we start with here. And this is available for both owners and loan policies. It is intended for use only on improved properties. This endorsement provides coverage against enforced removal or alteration of certain surface improvements due to the exercise of minerals or other subsurface substances. And so remember, when someone has the right to use the subsurface of the property, that's the dominant right on the property. the person who has the surface rights has the subordinate rights. And so in certain cases, you wouldn't be able to build anything on a property if you did not have subsurface rights. So certainly something that we are very concerned about when we're talking about seeing what's on the land. The New York DEC has a great map that will show the location of gas wells, oil wells, and other types of mines on the property. That's a good start when we're dealing with this sort of issue. Uh, we also want to make sure that we are completely reviewing the documents that create these subsurface rights, whether it's the oil and gas leases, the mining rights, or just a reservation of certain rights. The Alta 35.106 endorsement. It's available for both owners and loan policies. It's intended again on improved properties. This endorsement defines improvement as the buildings located on the land at the date of policy, as well as other improvements affixed to the land, such as walkways and parking areas, but it excludes coverages for crops, landscaping, lawns, shrubberies, or trees. And so if we're again concerned with those types of improvements, the 35.106 endorsement is the endorsement that we would want to be using. The Alta 35.2-06 endorsement, this one again for improved properties only. This one will allow us to provide coverage for enforced removal or alteration of a transaction-specific list of existing improvements. So again, depending on what improvements we're concerned with, what improvements are on the property, basically what your situation is, what you're being asked to do, the 35.206 endorsement allows us to get more specific about what types of removal or alteration we would be covering. The Alta 35.3-06 endorsement, available for both owners and loan policies. This is intended for use on commercial or residential property that is either vacant and being developed, or have improvements already, but additional improvements are being constructed. So in addition to a home, a second outbuilding on a commercial property. And then this endorsement provides coverage against enforced removal or alteration of the existing improvements as well as future improvements due to the exercise of the subsurface rights. The issuance of this endorsement will require a review of the detailed building and site improvement plans for contemplated improvements for review. So again, obviously, if we do not know where things are going to go, it's very difficult for us to be able to deal with these types of things. So we would need to see the building plans along with a survey to know what we're talking about. Now, one of the thoughts on the Alta 35 series is, first of all, we have to know what we're talking about as far as your severance of your surface rights and your subsurface rights. Yes, we do 40-year abstracts in most areas of upstate New York these days, but a 40-year abstract's probably not going to get you far when we're talking about these types of rights. Depending on where we're located, you can see the development of oil and gas leases starting in the 1930s, and going forward. We see subsurface mining going back to the late 1800s. And so if the 35 series is being asked for, we may need our searchers to go back far enough to be able to ensure that we do or we do not have a severance of those rights. The last endorsement that basically fills in the gaps of the idea of no more affirmative coverage is the terse identified exception and identified risk coverage endorsement. Um, and I've put the language of the blank filling parts of the endorsement here. Um, Number one, as used in this endorsement, identified risk means, and this is where you would put in the title defect, the restriction, the encumbrance, or other matter. We would point out which exception would show that. But if anything's in your abstract of title, such as an ancient mortgage, a judgment that we're willing to insure over, or any other various risk that would pop up in our examination of title that doesn't fit either your Alta 9 series with covenants and restrictions, your 28 series of things popping up on a survey, such as encroachments, um, easements, etc., or your oil and gas leases. Any of those other risks would be covered by your identified exception and identified risk coverage. So here, identified risk means whatever we plug in as our description of the title defect, and then we would point out which exception number on Schedule B we're talking about. And then the language of the endorsement: the company insures against loss or damage sustained by the insured by reason of a final order or decree enforcing the identified risk in favor of an adverse party. So starting from that, let's talk about, we're dealing with a mortgage from 1971. We have an ancient mortgage affidavit saying that there's been no act to try to collect from the current owner. And so in the past, we would simply raise the mortgage on Schedule B and add language that says that the policy will insure against the property being used for enforcement of the debt. No longer can we say that, obviously, in Schedule B. And as you look, this Part A would basically be the exact same thing: a final order or decree enforcing the identified risk in favor of an adverse party. So again, we cannot add language to these endorsements to tailor coverage in certain ways. We have to use the language of these endorsements. But again, if we're looking at the final order or decree enforcing the risk, that's really exactly what we would be trying to say in our endorsement. Now that we're using standard language, the courts know what we're trying to cover. There's no ambiguities. Our claims department knows how to defend on something like this because the language is standard language. You'll note on Part B, this really gets into the issue that having something in your chain of title that's a title defect would cause an issue regarding marketability. And so 2B says the release of a prospective purchaser or a lender on the title from the obligation to purchase or lend as a result of the identified risk. So that's your buyer walking away because of this encumbrance in your chain of title. Only if there's a contractual condition regarding the delivery of marketable title. In upstate New York, we do see that quite a bit in our purchase contracts, that marketable title is the standard. And neither our company nor any other title insurance company is willing to insure over the identified risk with the same conditions as in this endorsement. And so those are the conditions. If those are satisfied, then we would be offering this coverage for marketability. So that's a big that's a big endorsement. I think we will be using it a lot in our world when we have abstracts. I know in downstate areas, they're mostly working off prior owners' policies, and so they may not see these risks pop up that are still in our chains of title that we see in upstate New York. So I would expect that we would see this endorsement quite a bit. It's $135, excuse me, $150 on a residential file. And if we again go back to the first part, when we plug in the title defect, we can only plug in one. So if there are other, let's say there's a mortgage and a judgment that we're insuring over. In that case, you would need this identified risk endorsement for both risks, and they would be separate, and they would be separate $150 charges. So you actually may layer up a number of these identified risk coverage endorsements. Unlike in your Section 28 series, let's say when you have a coverage against an easement, you would plug in all of the easements into one endorsement and only have one endorsement that covers that issue. Whereas, again, the identified risk coverage endorsement, we're talking about layering up this endorsement. So that gets us to the final thoughts. The issuance of these new endorsements require much more than check the box. Some are significant alterations of coverage, which must be underwritten with care. Being sold the wrong endorsement may have serious implications for the property owner or the lender down the road. So not only for our agents, examining counsels, and underwriters here, um, we have to be careful when we're issuing these endorsements. But for the attorneys who may be on the call, you want to make sure that you're getting the right endorsement for your clients or for your lender. Because you may think you're covered by one endorsement, but at the end of the day, you may not be. If so, we want to make sure that we're not only as a company selling the proper endorsements, but as a customer, you want to make sure that you're getting the proper endorsement. Early on, we may see some confusion. We may see some carelessness with issuing the endorsement. So it is a good idea to make sure that we're getting the right coverages. Make sure you're working closely with your underwriters in order to select the right coverage. I know I've seen some questions pop up in the chat. If you have other questions, I'm going to open up the chat now, and Penny and I can start talking about what's in here. But if you have other questions down the road, my contact information is on the screen, or you can contact your trusted resource for title questions. So let me open up the chat and see what questions